Welcome to AstroChat with Anne Sundell, Kimberly Williams, and Monika Anna. We are three professional astrologers living in three separate countries, coming together every new and full moon to share our 3 points of view on astrology. Whether you enjoy deep dives into the current transits, or you are just beginning to learn about astrology for the first time, there is a place for you here. All that is required is an appreciation for astrology, along with respect for the various traditions within it. So grab a mug of coffee, your favorite cup of tea, or any other beverage of your choice, and join us for a chat on the astrology of the next 2 weeks. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another AstroChat. I know it's been a while. So glad to see everyone here, all three of us together at one time. Woohoo! We are going to be looking at the lunation that's coming up, the full moon, on March 14th. And it is a full moon, plus it is an eclipse. So we have lots to unpack and lots to talk about. The full moon will be at 23 degrees of Virgo. Here in the central time zone, we're looking at about 1:54 in the morning across the pond. Over in England, that would be 6:54, and in Finland, 8:54. But there's also an eclipse happening, and the totality of that will happen approximately 20 minutes before the lunation until about an hour afterwards. Here in my time zone of the central US, it's like 1:26 in the morning to 2:31 a.m., and you can do the math going across. So all of us that are in darkness or nighttime, haven't experienced sunrise yet, will have at least some visibility of this, hopefully. A few things of what's happening over the next 2 weeks. We're looking at the time period from March 14th until the 29th, which will be the next lunation, which will also be an eclipse in Aries. But we'll talk about that in 2 weeks. During this 2-week window, the sun will ingress into Aries around the 20th. We, of course, are dealing with Mercury retrograde. It happens the day after this lunation on the 15th. And throughout the month, we're going to see Mercury go from 9 degrees Aries back to 0. Venus is continuing her retrograde, which began back on March 1st at 10 degrees of Aries, and she's going to back up all the way to 28 degrees of Pisces. So we will see her retrograde ingress into Pisces on March 27th, just before the next moon. And Mars is continuing its direct, but continuing in its post-shadow of until really May. During this month, we're going from 17 to 23 degrees of Cancer. And this is going to echo for a lot of us what was happening back in October when it was direct at those degrees, and what was happening from mid-January to mid-February when it was retrograde over those degrees. And lastly, let's just point out that Neptune is pretty much at that anaretic degree of 29 degrees Pisces for most of the month. She will be ingressing into Aries on March 30th. We'll be talking about that in 2 weeks in our next podcast. So that's the summary of what's happening over the month. We're going to look at some of this and unpack just a bit of it. But first, Anne, why don't you start us off with looking at the Sabian symbol for this lunation?
Thank you. The Sabian symbol. Before that, I just want to have a short announcement about a conference that is happening in Sweden this year, and it's the first astrological international conference ever held in Sweden, and it's the 17th and 18th of May. And I can post in the comments a link so you can look at the program, but there's going to be some interesting speakers like Rick Levin, people from Finland, from Denmark, from different parts of the world. So if you're interested in the conference, you have questions, you can ask me about it also directly, and I can help you with that if you want to join. It's nice to have a conference in the Nordics now, finally. So we're starting something new here. So we go to the Sabian symbol for this full moon in Virgo, and it's 23 degrees over 23. So I'm reading the degree for 24 of Virgo, and it's Mary and her little lamb. So we have a degree which also says the need to keep a vibrant and pure simplicity at the core of one's being as one meets the many tests of existence. And I think that this is a very beautiful sentence of concerning the Pisces and Virgo axis. Virgo striving for something, some kind of perfection, but at the same time, we need to deal, like this month, we're going to deal with a lot of Piscean energy and a lot of things that we have to see also what is imperfection about and how can we balance these two signs that we are doing at an opposition when they are facing each other and the energies are, or we need to find a middle way of living Virgo and Pisces. And this is also, I think, highlighting some themes that have been for a long time on the radar, like Mars retrograde and these retrograding planets, and going back, revising things, and seeing maybe impurity and facing the own sides of this. With the full moon, it's a lot about the shadows. But I think Monika also you had some really good points about this Sabian symbol.
I always think between the Virgo and Pisces axis, that idea of innocence and naivete, there are different things between being innocent and having that childlike quality to approach the life, and having the naivete of where you just unaware of the dangers and potential pitfalls. Those two things are fairly different, very often mistaken. Very often people who are absolutely naive, they're considered innocent. Not quite. You can be innocent and have that pure approach to other people, to life, without actually being naive about it. And that's the beautiful quality for me in people, when they have that approach to life without being naive about the consequences of that approach. So that's definitely something that I think we'll see with this eclipse and with this moon coming up.
I also really liked before we recorded, you were sharing the idea of it could be a sign that there are issues with codependence and having to really look at our relationships so clearly about that, which is always what I thought of as a kid, because I did not like Mary Had a Little Lamb. It was my least favorite nursery tale. It was like, why can't the lamb just go do its own thing? And so I think this idea of clinging or closeness, it's one thing to have a bond, and that's beautiful. It's another thing to be attached. And I'm also just wondering if there's a little bit of this, could this bring up some of the feeling like a black sheep or afraid that I will, which I'm sure, Monika, you're going to talk about Uranus later. I'm sure you'll go down that rabbit hole. But those were some of the things that
Well,
hit me when you said it was this nursery rhyme.
I wanted to say, when you ask why that lamb couldn't just go off and do their own thing, usually the lambs that do that, those are consider the black sheep. That's what we have, isn't it? In our tribes, in our society, in our family. If you follow the rules, if you stick with the tribe, if you stick with the culture, if you stick with your family, you consider the nice white lamb, you know? When you go off and do your own thing, that's where you break away from the pattern. That's where that black sheep of the family, the black sheep of the groups coming in. So definitely, I think this is an interesting symbol for this lunation. Because at first it feels very gentle, and I don't think this lunation is gentle.
No, I would agree. It doesn't feel very gentle at all.
No.
Before we break out the things happening with the lunation, let's back up for a second and just look at the fact that this is a moon in Virgo, right? And I will try not to ramble on about it because we have many other podcasts. People can go back and listen to any of our other podcasts about new or full moons in Virgo and hear our thoughts on it. So just recapping here, as a fan of Virgo myself, a person with a lot of Virgo placements, I think Virgo's often misunderstood. We are often described as the ones who are tidy and need to clean and fastidious and the nags and the nitpickers. And although that can be true some of the time, I think we're missing the boat of what Virgo's about when we fall into those stereotypes. Virgo energy is about being contained. Virgo, the Virgin, is something that has to do with in ancient times. A virgin was a woman who was not defined by her role with any other man. Unusual. Usually you were somebody's daughter, wife, or mother, or a combination thereof. If you were unmarried and didn't have children, you were still somebody's daughter. You might be a sister, but really it was the roles that were limited to women were in that kind of area. And yet there were virgin goddesses. There were the Vestal virgins who were priestesses to one of the goddesses. So there were rare instances when a woman could stand on her own and be responsible for her own world and her own life. And this idea of I have everything I need contained within me, and I choose to bring it forward to be of service. And that's another key word for me. When I think of Virgo, its primary word is I serve. This idea of I want to bring all of this clarity and this yearning for order and a yearning for helping to be of service to the world in some way. I think that's probably one of the biggest things about Virgo energy across the board. We also see that Virgo, in addition to wanting order or to bring the sacred forward, there's something about quality. I want to improve the quality of life in the area of life where Virgo lives in your chart or with the influences happening through an aspect. It isn't just about making an improvement to see if I can build a better mousetrap, for example. It's about let's improve things because that improves the quality of life for me or my family or my world or my work or wherever it is I'm putting my energy into being of service. And there's so much more I could say, but I'm going to pause there. I'm going to open that floor to see what y'all want to say about Virgo energy, and then just encourage people to go back and listen to some of those other podcasts and get some other thoughts about other ways that Virgo can work. And what do you guys think?
Like I said before in some other podcast, Virgo energy is for me Amazonas energy in being practical about life and the practical intelligence of surviving and a connection with nature and a kind of bravery of doing it on their own too. So that's a symbol that I associate with Virgo, a very strong sign.
Yeah. Again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but Virgo is the season, the sign that rules the harvest season. It's very much about, again, using your faculties. Virgo is ruled by Mercury, using your faculties to discern what's good, what's bad, what's healthy, what's rotten, what serves you, what doesn't serve you. Again, very often that purity with Virgo is misunderstood, but it's if you have a bit of gold, if you just digged out gold from the earth, it might have other ores mixed with it. It might have sand or glass or iron or whatever. That's not gold. That's just mix of all the other stuff. The purity is when you basically take everything else and then you distill to just pure gold element in that. And that's what Virgo represents. It takes away all the other stuff, all the other crap that kind of gets attached to us, to our lives throughout the journey, and basically distill that to that authentic thing that we want, whether it's at work, whether it's in our love life. It just goes back to that pure core of anything that Virgo goes for. And again, it's very much looking at what serves us, not just necessarily where we serve as well, like Kimberly, like you said, but also what serves us, right? If I'm going to go through my fridge, it's very Virgo activity. I'm going to go and throw away all the processed food, maybe all the cakes, and maybe not throw away anything that doesn't serve me and my body in that healthy way, and leave the stuff that I know will actually nurture my body because that's what's good for me. That's very much Virgo activity. It's using that discernment to make the judgment call, but make that judgment call if in service of something. So whether you have Virgo on the 10th heaven and you make those calls because you're on a project and basically want to make, like Kimberly, you said, wanting to make that better, and you delete anything that doesn't serve that system, that project, whatever, whether it's for your own health, whether it's the relationship, getting rid of the relationship that no longer serves you. Virgo can be, the cleansing can comes in many ways.
Yeah.
In here.
And let's not forget that in ancient times, the constellation of Virgo, if you look at those images from the old world maps and things, she had wings. All the mutable signs are double bodied. There's two in the twins, there's two fish. The centaur is half human, half animal. Virgo is half divine, angel, goddess, half human. And so that idea of being a spiritual being and bringing that down into earth and having a physical experience. How do I channel the sacred through my acts of practicality and daily service, or things that I can do here on the physical plane is probably like the archetypal energy of Virgo overall, and also some of the challenges.
And that moon happening during the eclipse. So the Virgo moon is actually our eclipse. So it's the first eclipse of the season. We have the one on the 14th, and then we'll have another one on the 29th of March. So we're opening up eclipse season, and what a opener it is. If you remember from our previous podcast, eclipses come in pairs of opposites. So that's your eclipse season, and they usually happen, not usually, they happens every 9 and 18 years, roughly. So Kimberly, you gave me the dates earlier. The previous pair of eclipses that was happening started in March 2015 and finished in February 2017. And the previous before that was March 2006 and February until February 2008. So what happens usually around those cycles, because astrology ultimately is the study of the cycles for me. We look at what happened in the past in the same cycle. It means that it would have impact the same areas of our lives because it would have impact the same houses in our horoscope. So it would bring the same themes. So around 2015 to 17, 2006 to 2008, there should be a similar themes around the house in your horoscope coming up for you. So whether it's the 4th house and the 10th house axis of your work and career, maybe there were decisions around those years where you were making decisions around moving house or changing jobs or going back to school to requalify for a different job that then would have potentially upset or destabilize your home life in some way, or moving back home with your parents to again changed career path, whether it was 1st and the 7th house of relationships, whether it was the house of your 2nd and the 8th, your assets and your partner's assets or business partner assets. Those eclipses usually come for the same themes in your life. So I always encourage you to look back in your life on your Facebook thread, through your emails, through your calendar, whatever helps you remember, and see what comes up, because chances are that this eclipse will bring the same thing, but we'll bring them a little bit more with a bang. And I'll pause here just to see what you guys have to say.
And let's not forget, too, that this is the second eclipse of this cycle. This cycle that we're in now of the Virgo Pisces energy actually began back in the fall in September. We had an eclipse that was the other sign. It's 25 degrees of Pisces. And so in your chart, these two eclipses are going to be the opposite houses, but they're going to be aspecting similar planets a lot of the times. So this could echo not only those dates that Monika shared, but it could be echoing what you were experiencing in the fall as well. And eclipses are always about change, as we've said so many times. Actually, our eclipse episodes are our most watched episodes. I was going back and noticing like what people commented and what we said, and that seems to be the comments we get a lot, that everyone echoes and agrees with that. These are times of change, of opening, and those changes may be similar in nature or different, but they're going to affect those same houses within one's chart. Anne, what are your thoughts about this particular eclipse?
For me, this is an important eclipse because when you are born certain years and your moon nodes are in Virgo and Pisces, that means that the eclipses are going to be peaking at your nodes. So that's really important, yes, because they also follow the Saros cycle. That's a very old thing in astrology that observed thousands of years ago, that these cycles repeat themselves. So you can get the same cycle, for example, that I had when I was born is repeating now. So this can also, if you want to go into and check those numbers, the cycle of the eclipse, you can find when you have the same type of numbers or cycles. These can be very important eclipses for life direction or for changes. Or with Virgo, I think that Piscean energy, like Monika said, Virgo is the master of analyzing what's useful from this. Everything that we get, like Pisces, can be a bit like a swab that takes everything in and you cannot discriminate and you have to go through it. But with Virgo, you can actually look at what is useful. And sometimes it might be a bit clinical to look at what is actually useful, like in a very analytical, practical way, might feel a bit harsh, maybe, to a very idealistic way of viewing things, but opposites of the same coin. So it might be something around that that you really need to discriminate what area of life then it will be about.
All right, let me bring up the chart real quick just so people can have a visual if they're watching us on YouTube. Of course, if you're listening on a podcast, feel free to run your own chart, and we'll talk about the 3 items that each of us want to highlight and focus on. Give me just a second. So here is our chart for the full moon on March 14th, set to 1:54 a.m. for San Antonio, but feel free to set it to wherever you live. And we have the moon in Virgo opposite the sun in Pisces. I believe Anne wanted to talk about the fact that we have Venus is in the midst of her retrograde cycle with this particular eclipse. Monika wanted to talk about the fact that Mercury is retrograde, as well as all this Pisces and all this Virgo energy are aspecting Uranus through sextiles and trines. And then I'm going to wrap up by just talking about the fact that we have Saturn, Sun, North Node, and Neptune all in Pisces. And that Pisces stellium is making a grand trine with Mars in Cancer. And if you work with asteroids, Vesta is up here in Scorpio.
So I will start with Venus.
Take it away, Anne.
Okay, thank you. I will start actually with Mars, because we're still not out of Mars post-shadow. It's still trying to catch speed and go over the same degrees where it retrograded. This year has been like one retrograde after another with these personal planets. And also roughly a week ago, we had the situation where Mars was stopping its retrograde at the same time as Venus was stopping its retrograde, and it's direct going retrograde about the same time. Last week was about changing directions for Venus that will retrograde for about 40 days. Some astrologers have associated these 40 days with the story of Jesus in the desert when he was tempted by Satan. Venus can be about temptations. It can be about desires, about weak points we have with desire. It's interesting that way that that's not so predictable, because Mars doesn't have these cycles of retrogrades that we can see in the same manner as Venus got. So we know that this Venus period has been due in 2017 in the spring, so roughly around the same degrees. So this Venus retrograde connects to 2017. So you can think about what kind of changes or things about value, about relationships, about desire, or about what you connect with Venus, finances, has been going on 2017, because it might be a connection, this retrograde phase. And what's also that Monika is going to open with Mercury, like Venus and Mercury, both are moving in the same place in Aries. So we're getting like 2 retrograde at the same degrees. So it's really highlighting this place in Aries. Mars retrograded from Leo into Cancer, and for Mars, Cancer was not the optimal sign of expression. With Venus, we might have a bit different options, because in Aries, then Venus is maybe not so comfortable, but it will retrograde back to Pisces. So it will change sign into Pisces, and that might be then a shift in the energy. Venus will go to 24 Pisces up to about 13th of April, when it will turn direct. The points where Venus starts to grade and turn direct, when it is standing still a bit, when it's stationary, then those places are like highlights, I think, for that retrograde season. And also the pre-shadow, post-shadow. For some people, they might actually experience the retrograde more during the pre-shadow phase. This is also a phase that's debated about. Is it valid or not? But my experience is that people have experiences of the shadow phases as valid. especially with the personal planets that doesn't retrograde so often and so long time. In Aries can be quite bold. Venus can be direct, and Venus they can be direct with what they want. I mean, with Aries, it can be a very spontaneous way of showing Venus, and maybe also a bit impatient. I mean, if we look at the qualities of Aries as a fire sign, that can be also too much of me thinking. We have worked with this fire vs water energy with these retrogrades now a lot, like what is Aries versus Pisces, and also with the nodes, what is the difference between these signs. I think that this is once again highlighting Aries is ruled by Mars, and that's the approach with Aries. Venus is not the natural approach for Aries, so it might feel a bit malplaced there, but I think that this will highlight also relationship issues and how we view the own role there, and where we will be more selfish or maybe a bit too impatient, and where we should do a bit more diplomacy, then turning into Pisces, which is more about the spiritual way, and maybe they also, how can I explain that? The inner side of Venus. Aries can be a lot about the surface too. And I think that Pisces can be more about the inner feeling of the values, of the love, of how we experience what we need to have another spiritual fulfillment. So there are two very different signs that we are approaching here. So I think the energy is going to shift quite much when it goes into Pisces. Maybe I talked enough. I don't know when I have talked this much in podcast. Must have been very long ago.
We need to check if you did when Venus was married.
Yeah.
I know that of all the planets, Venus speaks to you on a very personal level, so I'm not surprised that you have a lot to say about her. And that's great info. I'm also really intrigued to see how this Venus retrograde plays out for everybody, because for the first part of it, while she's in the Aries, it's interesting because the last year and a half, all of our Aries conversation had been about the nodes, that the North Node previously was in Aries. And we kept talking it over and over again about learning to make it about ourselves, learning to release the bonds of needing to make it about others or the conditioning from others, like all that very karmic, big picture work. And now here we have almost like the opportunity to see if we did that work. We have the opportunity to play in that sandbox. And as you mentioned, she can be bold and brash, and it's like, what do I desire, and what do I want right now? So it can be really interesting to see, maybe if we did some of our homework the last year and a half, if we're able to embrace the Aries energy of Venus a little more fully than we would have once upon a time.
I'm smiling because every time I think about Venus in Aries, I see Xena, the warrior princess, like kick-ass warrior princess. And I think this is, again, another reason why we think of Venus as not being comfortable in Aries, because Aries is very much a warrior sign. And when we think about Venus, it's all about the feminine qualities, right? When you think about the warrior, you not necessarily see a woman warrior. What the Western society taught us is that feminine qualities are very much Piscean qualities. It's the compassion, it's the kindness, it's the embracing everything, not the one that kind of, stays there in a leather bra and kicks ass, right? That's not necessarily the vision of the feminine that we have in the Western society. For better or for worse, that's not the discussion I want to have here, but that's the discomfort, isn't it? When we step into that Xena warrior princess quality, especially as women, we are not being either treated seriously, or we're being treated as we're stepping into outside of what is considered being feminine or good for the female. But it's just another expression. This is what I love about astrology. Astrology doesn't say which expression is right or wrong. It says actually there are different sides to expressing that quality of energy. And actually every sign has the shadow and the light expression of that quality. We can get lost in that, or we can use that for positive. So I remember as a young girl actually watching Xena Princess, and I was thinking to myself, that's awesome. That's the role model I want to have, someone who is very out there and go for things. And yet I could see that contrast with what's being presented to me in other media about what the feminine or what the woman, female should look like and should desire. So it's interesting that Venus is moving between those two signs, not only contrasting them, because there are a lot of contrast between them, but moving from one place to another, like you say, Kimberly, to teach us, have we learned the lessons and can we apply both sides of expression? Because we all have Aries and Pisces somewhere in our charts. So can we apply both sides of expression? Can we nurture that beautiful compassion quality in us and desire the kindness and embracing the whole humanity? At the same time, can we step into that warrior princess and actually kick ass when we need to kick ass to protect those qualities, to protect those that we want to embrace? So I think it's interesting that it's happening again around this eclipse season and this eclipse portal.
And let's not forget that because she's retrograde, this is for many of us a very internal journey. It may not be something I am expressing around me. I'm not focused on my desires in the outer world just yet. It could be I'm uncovering or discovering, what do I really desire deep at my core? What do I not desire that I thought I did? What is desire versus want? And I always think when Venus is retrograde in any of the signs, I'm always reminded of, the myth of Inanna descending into the underworld and going through each gate and having to remove some of her sense of identity, something that was a symbol of her power and her authority and her autonomy, and getting to the core of who I am and what do I really desire before I re-enter the world. And so I think as she's in post shadow, going direct, might be where we have that aha moment of what it was about, what I was learning. Right now, with all this Pisces Virgo energy, it might just be I feel the need to be really bold, but I'm not sure where or how, or but it could be a little fluid.
It's I love how whenever we look at the chart, it's like following that Ariadna thread, right? Like we're pick one things and that leads to another and that leads to another, and actually all of them tell pretty much the same story. So we're talking about Virgo and eclipse and need for stripping down and discernment and discarding what no longer serves us. That's ultimately what Virgo brings, right? And that's what, like I said, much more powerful because that's with the eclipse energy. So just going back to what the eclipse usually represents, and I think I've been saying that on every eclipse episode. Eclipse is where the universe steps in. Full moon, new moon is where we having that collaboration, conversation. We can do our manifestation. We can do our rituals. Eclipse is when the universe was like, no, babe, you stop. This is me telling you which direction you're going, or we're changing direction, we're changing tracks. This is where you're going happily on a train on one tracks, and the universe stands there and just pull the lever or whatever and change the tracks, and you just go in completely different direction. So those are the moments in our life, in our year, where the universe or fate or hand of destiny, however you want to call it, sometimes comes in and brings that crossroad and brings that different direction. But in Virgo, it will be asking very much about discernment. Where can we strip to be, again, fully us, pure us, like the authenticity? Then we have Venus retrograding around the same time. Kimberly, you're bringing back that Inanna story again, stripping down everything that you don't need to go back to what is really important, what's at the core of my values, Venus, of the things that I desire, Venus, right? And on top of that, we have now Mercury. So I'm going to link now Mercury and Uranus to that. Mercury is the ruler of this lunation, of this eclipse, because Mercury rules Venus. So again, this is where that mental faculties and Mercury comes in when we creating that discernment, when like in a harvest, we discard all the rotten fruit and keep all the good one. Mercury, again, going back to Kimberly, what you mentioned about Virgo, is the only god in the Olympus that could travel between Olympus, Earth, and underground, underworld without any permission. He could meet heaven and hell and earth without any permission. All the other gods, they have their own domain. They had to be invited to the other one, he was the one flying in and out. And again, having that quality between the spiritual and material. So that's very much what you were talking about, Virgo and the wings, right? So we have Mercury being ruler of this, talking about discernment, and yet Mercury is stationing retrograde. It's in the degree that it will go and retrograde the day after this eclipse. So Mercury already stopped and was like, uh-oh, I think I forgot something. I think there's something going on. I need to go back and check. That's what the retrograde for me is. It's the moment when you rush out of the house and you stop for a second and you just go, oh, sugar, I think I forgot my keys, or I forgot my phone, or whatever. And then you retrace your steps, checking whether or not that phone didn't fall out of your pocket on the way from the house. So that's what really, for me, in very simple terms, what the retrograde is. You retrace your steps. You do that a bit slower. You don't rush back to the house because you don't know if you didn't lose those keys or that phone on the way. So you need to go back and review every step you took to see when and how that kind of mistake potential, that loss had happened. So we have Mercury as part of this eclipse ruler going, okay, something's happening, it's big, I can't see the light, our luminary is being eclipsed, there is no light in the sky, I need to stop, I need to think, I need to go backwards. And then we have also Uranus, who is the higher octave of Mercury. And Uranus is actually sextiling the sun and trining the moon. So it's making that beautiful connection with the moon and the sun. It's nice, easy energy, but it's Uranus is something that shakes us up. So for me, this is the idea of when the eclipse happened, if we can imagine just light being taken away from the sky, and then Uranus, the god of lightning, comes in and brings that insight into, hey, the darkness sometimes is not that dark, or sometimes the darkness can have that illumination on their own. So there is something around both Uranus and Mercury bringing the insight through, stopping, going back, and maybe rethinking, reevaluating, re-editing our lives with Mercury retro, and Uranus actually shaking the ground underneath our feet. Uranus is in Taurus, earth sign. This eclipse is in Virgo, earth sign. There is that kind of element of the ground that we are is shaken up. The values that we hold, that kind of beautiful, organized cupboard that we have with Virgo suddenly is shaken up and things are misplaced or things are misaligned. That's the feeling and the quality I feel about this eclipse. Something's shaking underneath, bringing us into that kind of discomfort. Uranus is that energy that flows sometimes under our skin, that kind of buzz of electricity. If you ever stood very close to a pylon, you could hear the buzzing of the energy. That's Uranus for you. So there's that kind of buzzing going on in the air. It's dark, you can't see things because the light has been taken. And the Mercury goes, okay, that's my rulership. I'm just going to go backwards. I need to check something to make sure that I haven't forgotten. So this eclipse is really interesting. And given that Sabian symbol that we were talking about earlier, that Mary has a little lamb, how beautiful Virgo that is. And suddenly the eclipse and Uranus is shaking everything. And I think Mary will have to go back and check on the other herd and see if there is some of the lambs didn't go into the underworld with Inanna. Maybe some of them just bugger off to another land or something, and suddenly she only left with one lamb when actually she was supposed to look maybe after the whole herd. So there is that element of unexpected, of shaking us at our core. Venus rules Taurus and Uranus is in Taurus still. So again, is that kind of shaking our core values, shaken the earth we're walking on. So I think that this eclipse is going to be an interesting one. And just to add last bit, when we talk about all those elements, very much they will play out on a global scale as they always do. But how they impact you on a personal level is always dependent on when you have your own planets and important placements. Like Anne mentioned, if you have your own nodes in Pisces and Virgo, that will be important eclipse for you. If you have your luminaries close to that eclipse degree, again, that will be important eclipse for you. But if there's nothing that connects personally to your own chart, you might see that playing up in your family and friends, and you might see that playing up in the world around you, but not necessarily bringing that kind of shaking for you. But it's still worth checking the house, because house will indicate which area of life it will happen. You might have nothing in the second or the eighth house, but if the eclipse falls there, potentially you might experience that through your partner. Eighth house of dependencies and codependencies, as the little lamb told us.
I also find that during retrogrades is a time when we can receive the download. I think, Anne, you mentioned earlier that it's not just a retrograde, that something's moving and then it stops, right? And then it shifts direction, but it takes a minute before we put our foot on the gas and start going in reverse. And during that period of it stopped moving and it hasn't started moving, when it's stationary direct and stationary retrograde, during that period, I feel like we're really open to downloading the energy of these planets. And with Mercury, when it's retrograde, it is such the psychopomp. In fact, Demetra George talks about this in a couple of her workshops, the four phases of Mercury. And during the retrograde, that's the phase of Mercury who can go into the underworld. And so if you layer all these things together, like Monika was saying, there's a lot of energy of unpacking, shedding, being stripped down to our core. And so, what is at our core? What is it that wants to inform us? What is it that is in our underworld of the unconscious, or the world of dreams, or the world of when I give myself time to just watch the clouds and come up with images? What is it that comes forward? And I think there's something here about hidden desire wanting to come forward, wanting to remind us maybe of what it is we hold at our core about this. Anne, any thoughts about Mercury, or should we move on to talking about all that stellium and Pisces?
Just generally about the retrogrades, like with Venus retrograde period, this might be a period that's also, if we're talking about karmic relationships or people, spirit, souls connected to us from before, this might be a window where we might meet somebody that we have been connected with before. If we believe in other lifetimes, it might be somebody that comes back into life for a reason, for example. So this Venus retrograde might also be a period where somebody reappears in your life. It might be from this life or from somewhere else. Just a note.
Wow, good insight there. So before we wrap up, I wanted to talk a bit about the fact that we have stellium in Pisces. We have Saturn, the Sun, the North Node, and Neptune. And although it's out of orb, they're co-present with the asteroid Ceres at the early degrees of Pisces. That's a lot of Pisces energy. And I think that when you have that many planets together, and planets and points, when you have them together, it creates intensity. And that intensity can be what pulls us in. So some people might be feeling right now not that Virgo energy, but rather the other side. We might be feeling pulled into the Pisces energy of what is spirit wanting to tell us? What are we merging and bonding with? Saturn is here. Where do we feel limitations or obstacles or authority pushing up against us? The North Node is here. Where do I want to be opening up, surrendering to my higher self or spirit or something that feels a little more like blissful Piscean? Neptune is here. Where am I confused? What is it I need to allow to dissolve away if we're working with this positively? Where do I feel confused and I don't even see that I'm trapped? And are those traps of my own making? Are those obstacles my own self-sabotage or self-undoing? All this can be happening. And so that can pull us in, and it almost can feel like quicksand if we're not using that Virgo discernment to understand, to think about, to have clarity. And with that kind of intensity, we might shoot to the other side. Sometimes with stellium energy, it's just too intense and it's too much, especially if you have a lot of planets being impacted by all this Pisces energy. We might just shoot to that other side and say, I'm staying in Virgo land. I'm going to use my inner critic I'm going to use discernment. I'm going to make a plan. I'm going to make up some rules. And we can be a little too hard with ourselves. And so the challenge here, I think, is finding the balance. And for me, that understanding the balance comes from the fact that Pisces is just one of the water signs involved. That Pisces energy, because suns and moons have really wide orbs, they're making a trine to that Mars that Anne was talking about earlier, that Mars in Cancer, where I'm sure many other people like myself are feeling that frustration of not being able to take action to move forward in life because there's some kind of Cancer theme that I'm having to work through first. Mars in Cancer is not a happy placement. It's not one of its favorite spots to be. And by the dignity scales, this is a really hard placement. But I feel like when planets are in their fall, they have a superpower. The superpower is it isn't bad that they're in their fall. What's bad by other standards and other people is we don't play by the same rules. We're not doing things in the standard way anymore. We're stepping out. So going back to what was alluded to earlier, I might have to be the black sheep. I might have to do things different than I have or have been told to do, that my actions can't just be run forward like Mars wants to. I have to stop and think about what do I need to nurture so that I have what I need. Before we take a long trip, often we have to do the checklist, thinking Virgo here, making the list, have the checklist, pack everything in the backpack, put it in the car, make sure we have a full tank of gas, make sure we have what we need before we can go forward. That's how I think about this Mars in Cancer. The frustration of not being able to just take off and go, but recognizing that all the details we're bombarded with are really a way of nurturing where we want to be taking energy. And now it's talking to Pisces, which means it's not just about me wanting to take energy, it's about my spirit. Me, my ego, connecting with spirit, connecting with that moon, my body. And if you work with asteroids, Vesta is up in Scorpio, making an exact trine to that Mars, both trining all that Pisces. So there's something here about what is it that transforms our actions from being something mundane into being something sacred. I keep going back to that idea of Virgo of how do I bring my divine self down into this physical world and do things on a very practical level that reflect some of that spirit that's at my core, that's within me, that we all carry. I know I'm getting very philosophical, but it just fills my heart with joy. And that's just how I feel when I look at all this Pisces energy, making all this trine and all of it just flowing. The flip side is if we're not open and we're not giving ourselves time, I think Monica, you and I were talking beforehand about it feels sometimes like we're the computer with too many tabs open. And as we start closing those tabs and doing something that allows us to have focus, peace, grace, rest, suddenly we're in that space of being able to receive maybe some of this information or remember or uncover, let it bubble up from our unconscious into us. If we're not doing that, then it could just be an overwhelm of emotion, frustration, anguish, confusion. What are your thoughts about having a lovely Pisces Cancer energy with all these planets?
It's a lot of water. It's a sea. It's a deep ocean. But I agree with you on that point that when it's that intense, many times you go to the opposite side to find tools, like Virgo has got tools, which might be too controlling, too making things too rigid. But still, this is a confusing month that way, that we have so much in Pisces. And it makes it harder to make decisions, or you might feel that I don't know where to go. I don't know the answer. And you don't need to know yet.
I mean, it's interesting that both Mercury and Venus will step into that Piscean soup as well. So there'll be even more Piscean energy, and actually it will be even more Piscean energy on that personal level with Mercury and Venus. So not only you won't know, like, and you'll say, I don't know, but also I won't be able to explain myself, Mercury, and I won't even know what I desire anymore with Venus. It does feel like a very chaotic primordial speak today. See? I already feel that. like that primordial soup of chaos when everything and nothing was there. Light and darkness and everything else was part of that before the cosmos, so to speak, was born in so many of the mythologies. And it feels a little bit like that, like everyone is drawn into that black hole. And again, I can't escape that eclipse imagery, right? That black hole when the light gets sucked in and can't get out. And that Piscean energy feels a little bit like that, that everything just gets sucked into the depth of the ocean where the light doesn't get, right? Because it's that deep, when there are creatures that we probably haven't even met yet, and everything gets sucked in there, and you don't know what's up or down, what's left and right. And that's the kind of Piscean soup that can be incredibly overwhelming, incredibly disillusioning, if that's the word, but also incredibly creative. A lot of creativity comes from the chaos, from the need that chaos creates. We can then discern actually what we need and where we want. And sometimes we need to maybe be a bit directionless to actually put our foot down and say, no, I want to go in that specific direction. I feel like very much often we go into direction that is expected, you know, very the kind of good girl archetype in Virgo, for example, right? But not actually stopping and thinking whether or not that's the direction that I do want to go. And then you go into that big soup up and down, and you have opportunity to be in that chaos. And sometimes in that chaos, like in the eye of a cyclone or like of a hurricane, you can stop and you can listen because there's just peace and quiet around that. And then you can actually really get to listen to that core. And with all those planets supporting that, you have the North Node. North Node moved to Pisces. I don't think we've spoken about on our podcast a lot about the node shift. I think we need to probably talk a little bit more about that. But that's where, as humanity, as a society at the moment, we're moving towards, right? With that North Node. That's the lesson we want to learn. That's the archetype that we want to explore. That's the energy we want to explore. And it feels like that North Node, like a magnet, just attracts everything else. Like, oh, come on, Saturn, come and chill with me. Neptune, come and chill with me. Venus, Mercury, I'm not letting you go yet. We need to go and chat. And with Neptune being at the last degree, Kimberly, you mentioned that earlier, the anaretic degree. It's like we need to learn about that Neptunian Piscean waters and make sure we've done our lessons of the last, is it 20 years, 17 years? How long the Neptune's been in this? Neptune actually entered Pisces in 2012.
It's a long time.
That's right. It was everyone was talking about the end of the Mayan calendar, and that was correlating with the
Neptune.
generally speaking, correlating with the shift with Neptune.
Yeah. And Neptune will move to Aries on 30th of March.
Yeah.
Day after the eclipse.
So I think the takeaway here is this is a very chaotic eclipse, but fasten your seatbelts because the next one is going to be even more intense. I feel like with this one, it's the bow, and we're drawing back, and we're having to breathe and focus and breathe again and feel the tension in our arm. But the next one that is going to be in Aries will be when we let go, and it all comes forward. And the next one will be the last, I believe, in the prior cycle that is closing out of Aries Libra.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it should be an intense one.
Yeah.
All right. So before we part, shall we share some tips and tricks?
Sure. Do you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. Mine is pretty easy, and I'm thinking I may be echoing what I said last time. So if I am, then it's still in play. My advice, my tips and tricks for this one is rest. Eclipses are times of change. They're not necessarily times to take action. They're times to allow ourselves to receive information from our unconscious or spirit or whatever it is you work with. An opportunity to rest. With all this water, we may find that we're still tired, that sleep is fitful. I know I don't sleep well during eclipse seasons. We might just need that nap or that to go outside and read a book or 5 minutes of sunshine. So it isn't about being lazy. It isn't about not, being productive enough. If you get those inner critic voices that say, I need to be producing and serving and all those other lovely Virgo terms, just breathe and remember that you're a spirit in a human body, and sometimes that body needs rest. And perhaps in that state of rest, we can receive glimpses of what's percolating in the back of our mind that will be coming forward in the next 2 weeks. What about y'all?
I would examine the degrees of Mercury and Venus, like going to check out in detail, analyzing Virgo way, where is 9 degrees Aries up to 24 Pisces in your chart. What's happening there? Connect it maybe to 2017. Do you find similarities in the Venus cycle? Look back to see with Venus that can be some practical advice, like if you want to do a radical makeover of your hair color, maybe you should think twice when it's in Aries. If you want to repaint your house, you could check the color mix a few times. You might find something beautiful, something valuable to you, something old that you might forgot, or it might be an item, might be a person. Just visit Venus land.
Visit Venus land. Love that. I think for eclipse season, I think we always say that in every episode, always check your cycles and the houses that are affected, because that will really give you an insight of what can come up for this cycle, whether it's the Venus retrograde, whether it's the nodes changing signs and houses, whether it is an eclipse season. It's always worth checking out your personal cycle, because that will speak volume to what can unfold in the next couple weeks, couple months. From my side, my tip would be for the eclipse, create chaos on purpose. So if you can actually introduce a little bit of a chaos, a little bit of a settling, you kind of meeting the eclipse halfway there, and you can say, do you know what? I'll see your eclipse. I see you, Uranus. I'm going to do a little bit of that myself. So if you come out of the house and always go right, go left, change the route to work. If you always take a train, maybe take a bus. You don't know what or who you might meet or who you might run into or what you might find on the way there. So embrace the chaos, embrace that Piscean unknown waters, and see if you can do that for this eclipse season, especially around this weekend, this coming up weekend, 14th, 15th. If you can do something different and unusual. If on Saturday you're always going to McDonald's, go to KFC. If you go always to McDonald's, hey, maybe you actually make a salad at home. Like, just do something different. It doesn't have to be massive, but it has to be something that will take you out of the ordinary into something that will make you feel, oh, I've never done that before, or I haven't seen that road before, or I haven't taken this bus before. That can be unsettling, but that might be you speaking to that eclipse and saying, I see you, I'm trying to meet you halfway. And as always, I always say, with the eclipses, this is not the time of you telling universe what you want. This is you actually saying, okay, universe, I hear you. What is it that you want to tell me? So for a change, maybe just sit down and listen. And like Kimberly said, have that rest, have that moment when you can switch off all the tabs, switch off the music that you don't know where it comes from, and push that reset button.
I think all of that is great. All three of us have some amazing insight, and I'm going to try to incorporate both of your ideas into my life this coming weekend. With that, I guess we're done. That's a wrap, and we'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about the upcoming eclipse in Aries. Be sure to stay tuned, check the bell, do the notifications if you're on YouTube, do on the podcast channels, whatever it is that your channel does to let you know when we're back. Bye. Thank you for joining us in this week's AstroChat. We hope that you enjoyed the discussion and would love to hear about anything that resonated with you. Keep the conversation going by posting shareable content on our Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube pages. You can also email us at astrochatpodcast@gmail.com. AstroChat is uploaded every 2 weeks on the Saturday before each new and full moon. Look for us on your favorite podcast platform as well as on YouTube. You can support AstroChat and receive exclusive content by donating on our Patreon page. We look forward to chatting with you all again at the next lunation of the moon.